So during the 1500s, the Americas were not actually the only new lands being discovered. Not even close. There was another entirely new world, almost entirely unknown to Europeans, that was still being explored and discovered bit by bit. This was the Indo-Pacific, or the East Indies, and the surrounding islands in the Indian Ocean, down to the Arctic. This undiscovered realm stretched from the islands off the coast of East Africa all the way to New Zealand. Although there were Europeans exploring these lands to discover unknown civilizations, societies, biomes, and plant and animal species, the overwhelming reason for the European discovery of the Indo-Pacific came down to one reason alone: access to the spice trade. From medieval times all the way until the early 1800s, spices were the most lucrative commodity on the entire planet. For centuries, spice was the only known way to effectively preserve meat through the long winters of Europe. Spice could mask the scent of spoiled food, spice became a demonstration of wealth, and even found uses in medicine. The expeditionary voyages that set out to discover and accumulate spices in the Indo-Pacific could easily yield a 1,000 to 3,000% profit. But there were many risks. And the most common risks were the silent killers, such as disease, such as scurvy, dysentery, and typhus. Their mouths were so rotten that the teeth fell out with a touch. The gums were swollen like sponges and stank horribly. Some had their legs swollen as thick as a man's waist, black and shining, and when pricked, the blood ran like syrup. Many died raving mad, crying for oranges and lemons that were not there. Beyond this, a single navigational error could send a ship or an entire fleet into an unknown storm in the middle of the night, attempting to navigate the pitch black waters, ultimately toppling and sinking the ships. This wasn't a rare occurrence. However, if you could survive these risks for 18 to 24 months and return to Europe with a load of spice, the profits were astronomical, totaling up to a sum equal to a range of $100 to $270 million in today's currency. Dodo Island, which is called Mauritius today as it was named by the Dutch after the Dutch prince, was actually known to Arab sailors who called it Dina Arobi as early as 900 AD. However, I prefer to call it Dodo Island, and I will continue to refer to it as such from here on. Although it appears on 1100-year-old Arab maps, we have no documentation of Arab sailors exploring or settling the island, simply sailing past it while going along their trade routes. 600 years later, in 1507, the Portuguese spotted the island, visited it, and recorded it, but made no permanent settlement, and no surviving documents tell us today what they found or saw on the island. So that's why Dodo Island was discovered, but what did the first explorers actually find? The first written account of exploration on the island comes from Dutch sailors in 1598, nearly an entire century after the Portuguese visited the island, when Van Warwick's fleet of 5 ships anchored in a bay of the island 3 months after setting sail from Holland. Dodo Island is located just off the coast of East Africa, on the other side of Madagascar. As far as the Dutch could tell, no humans had ever lived there, and the island had never been settled. There were no footpaths found anywhere across the island. The only reason anyone would have stopped here is to rest or forage supplies while using the prevailing winds which cross the island's path on your way further east toward Indonesia. The island was beautiful though, mountainous and covered in thick green forest, banded together by perfectly white beaches and coral reefs that surrounded the island. The valleys of the island were filled with spectacular rivers and streams of fresh water. The sea around the island was bright blue and green, and the air was refreshing and untouched. By this point in history, there were very few places left on the earth where one could walk through a pristine, untouched wilderness that had looked the same for eons before mankind. The island is very pleasant to behold, being high land full of woods with very fine and delicious smell coming from the woods. The land is mountainous, but the mountains are covered in very beautiful green trees right up to the top. The island is surrounded by a rim of white sand beaches and coral reefs. Inside it is very mountainous and covered with ebony and other fine woods. We found the air very healthy and temperate. There were a few critters scurrying throughout the island. The Dutch explorers found goats, pigs, rats, and even species of monkeys known as rhesus, known only to be found in East Asia. It was surprising to find these monkeys here. The Dutch assumed that these animals had been released here by the Portuguese explorers nearly a century before. Among the island's dense interior, the Dutch did not find a single 4-legged mammal that was native to Dodo Island. They did, however, discover a staggering number of giant tortoises, measuring 4 to 5 feet long and weighing up to 650 pounds each. Land turtles are here in such incredible numbers that one can walk on their backs for half an hour or more along the beach. The two species of giant tortoise that lived on Dodo Island were the domed and saddleback tortoises. And along with the dodo bird, both of these giant species are also extinct today. They were so large that 8 men could sit on the back of a single tortoise. They were so common, the Dutch said, that they could be found in quote-unquote infinite numbers throughout the island. You could walk on top of their shells for half an hour along the beach without even touching the sand. They loaded 50 to 200 of these tortoises onto each ship to use as food for the coming journey, and noted that the tortoises could go up to a full year without having food or water before dying. Sounds like a miserable existence for the tortoises, though. The Dutch write that the extinct tortoise's flesh was filling and tasted like beef, and that when its fat melted, it was better than the finest olive oil. Along with these, they also found other reptiles, dozens of undiscovered species of lizards and geckos with beautiful assortments of colors that were found throughout the island. But even more common than the giant tortoises, the island was filled with hundreds of thousands of birds and bats. They record seeing bats that looked like flying foxes with wings that soared like eagles. They slept in enormous colonies hanging from the tree branches during the day and swirled overhead in giant clouds around the island at dusk. And of course, the Dutch had to try some bat meat as well. They said it tasted like rabbits and it was very good when roasted.